last time we talked, we started a new area of study, and that is the presentation of lures. As I mentioned the last time we talked, I don't particularly care whether or not you prefer to cast or whether you prefer to troll. If we want to consistently catch fish, I'm talking about we catching them every time we go out. We have to do both things. We cannot do one to the exclusion of the other. Sometimes, as I mentioned, there'll be times when only trolling can be used. There will be times when only casting can be used. But in most all fishing, we can use both. In my normal fishing day, I'm doing both. Now, as I mentioned before, there will be times when only one, either trolling or casting, would be the only efficient way of doing it, presenting lures. But in most all fishing, with those exceptions out of the way, in most all fishing, casting and trolling can both be done and should both be done on a normal fishing day. With that being said, and even going back and including those specific times where if I'm trolling in the river and there's a 12-mile-an-hour current, I can only troll, I can't cast. If I'm out on the Great Lake fishing for coho, I'm not going out there with a casting rod. All of those instances I already told you about, those are the exceptional times. And then my knowledge of a fish, my knowledge of presentation, tells me what I need to do, but then I have to have the physical ability to present lures in both ways, so that I'm never without that weapon. Whatever situation I come upon, whatever situation you come upon in your fishing, you need to have the confidence that you know whatever the situation, you're ready to go. You're going to go out there and control your depth and speed. If trolling is called for, you're going to troll. If casting is called for, you're going to cast. But you're ready, no matter which it is, regardless of what's called for on any fishing day. You need to be equipped to do it. Not only have the right equipment, but you have to be prepared to either cast or troll and control the depth and speed that's needed that day in that situation to catch your fish. So we're going to be talking about trolling and casting, and I'm going to start with trolling, and I'm going to tell you why. Buck, in all of his years, he really emphasized the trolling. I think I've mentioned this before too. He said, listen, anybody can make a cast. He said, it's not that hard. Anybody that's ever done any fishing, they can make a cast. And knowing exactly where to make a cast and so on and so forth, that's all what's really important. But actually making a cast, or talking about teaching it as a method of fishing, it doesn't take a whole lot of teaching. In my on-the-water schools, I talked about it for maybe about 5 minutes. That's about it. But trolling and being a good troller, that's a whole different deal. And I'm going to start this area of study by showing you a video that I made back in the day. And again, we were shooting Betacam. It's not my favorite thing to show you, but the information is really good. And it allows me to show in detail, which I already did back then, the 3 different types of trolling that we do. I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I did enough that I want to share that video with you. And it first talks about what we call contour trolling, which is the way that we effectively fish any water from 8 to 10 feet or less on the troll. I was out in Mississippi at Grenada Reservoir when we made this video. And because we have like a 2-mile stretch of dam, which can, it's a pretty easy shot to see what the heck I was doing when I was contour trolling. And if you remember the story, it's where Buck was determined to make me a good troller. He made me fish for 2 days with him in the front of the boat, fishing all the way down all through the lures, all the way down on that riprap by feel. By following the contours, not following the break line, following the contours. And he made me, even when I was going this way, where I was on the deep side and he was on the shallower side, I had to feed off of his rod, watching it bump and free run and bump and free run in order to follow those features. And he said, in the end, the scorecard will tell it, it'll be telling. And I said, what's the scorecard? He says, how many fish we catch? It was a little trying 2 days for me. The guy that wrote the books in the front of the boat, and I got to keep his lure just right without a depth sonder. for 2 days. But as good fortune would have it, the big bass had moved into that dam. This was late October, maybe even early November. It was late fall. And there was already a drawdown, and those fish were in there, stacked in there. And we caught, he estimated we caught about 250 bass that weekend without a depth sonder. And I really felt that I learned to troll that day. Well, I decided when I was making this bass tape back in the late 80s, whatever it was, I went back there to the same spot at the same time of year, figuring I'll go out, catch all these big fish, and do a little bass tape and talk about fishing a reservoir, a man-made structure. And a funny thing happened on the way to the bank. Those big fish weren't in there. There were some bass in there. I think the first pass we caught 9. I caught 9 fish, but the small fish were in there. Big fish weren't in there. But I was really out there for a couple of reasons. To make a tape looking at structure where the water was pulled down. I wanted to show that, and at the same time I wanted to make this tape showing the 3 different main ways that we go about our trolling, at least a 101 version of that.
So as we begin our discussion on trolling, I'm going to start with contour trolling. And when I say contour trolling, basically what I mean is that we're going to be following the contours of the lake bottom. We're not going to be fishing a particular feature like a bar, let's say, or a break line, or a feature on the bottom of the lake that we're specifically shooting at, but rather we're just going to cover the contours of the lake bottom, and we do this in the first 8 to 10 feet of water or less. The reason we do it is fish react differently in the shallows than they do deep. They established thousands of years ago that when they're in 8 to 10 feet of water or less, they'll react in a certain way. When they're deeper than 10 feet, they act differently. So the bottom line here is in the shallows, they'll take a lure off the top. They'll take a surface lure. They'll also take a lure free running somewhere in the in-between water, and they'll also take lures off the bottom. But as we get deeper than 10 feet, and this is especially important when talking about bass, we must have our lure on the bottom, deeper than 10 feet. And we'll talk about that in our other procedures. But in contour trolling, I'm talking about what we're going to be doing in the shallow water, which basically means we're going to strain the water from the bank to 10 feet. And we're going to do it by following bottom contours. The lures I use in trolling, 99% of the time, are Buck Perry spoon plugs. The reason I use these lures is quite simple. I don't get them for free or anything like that, but they will go to exact depths and maintain those depths regardless of how I vary my speed. I can go very slow, or I can go medium, or I can go extremely fast. And the lures will stay at that prescribed depth. So if I'm going to effectively check or strain water from 0 to 10 feet, I need to know that my lures have covered all the water. And I have to cover it, of course, at different speeds. So the spoon plugs will really do the job. The first 3 size lures would be the 500, 400, and a 250. And the 500 goes to 4 feet, the 400 goes down to 6, and then the last lure, the 250, goes down to 9 feet. And by varying my line lengths, I can get a minimum and maximum depth out of each lure. And by straining the water with these 3 lures, whether it be an irregular shoreline or a rocky riprap along a dam like we're going to use this morning, or a causeway, doesn't matter. Regardless of the water that I'm fishing, I know these 3 lures, 8 to 10 feet and less, I won't be able to strain it, and if there's any fish activity, I'm going to know about it. Now, when you fish in the shallows for bass, and most of you tournament guys can verify this, 95% of the fish you're going to catch are going to be like that. They're going to be small fish. It's just the way it is. It's not because we're not catching them because we're not good fishermen. We're not catching them because in most all cases they're not there. The weather and the water conditions do not allow the fish to move that shallow very often. But in our fishing, we can't assume that there are no good fish in the shallows. At times there will be, certain weather conditions, seasonal conditions. So automatically when I go fishing, I start my work, my mechanical work, at the bank, and I start fishing deep. We said the fish are somewhere in the lake, shallows, deep, somewhere in between. But we can't assume there's no good fish in the shallows. Another benefit of contour trolling and checking the shallows is that many times, even though we don't catch big fish, we may come across an area that has a number of small fish, and that will direct our attention to that spot, and then all we have to do is begin to work deeper, and we'll normally arrive at the bigger fish. So by contour trolling, we're going to be able to strain the water, eliminate unproductive areas in the quickest fashion possible. We'll be able to feel the lake bottom, so we'll know the makeup of the lake bottom. We'll also be able to tell when we come to an area of structure where there's a big change taking place. We're also going to be able to strain the water and see if there's any fish activity. And occasionally, as I say, you're even going to catch a big one. So contour trolling is a very effective way to fish, and especially when you come to certain type areas, like we're going to show here this morning. We're at the dam area of this reservoir, and I'd say out to the end of this thing is probably 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles. And if I had to cast every spot and every little rock going along there, it'd probably take me half a day. On the other hand, I could make a few trolling passes, and in a matter of 20 minutes I've covered it all. And I don't want to waste time fishing an area if there are no fish there. So I want to do this as quickly as possible, and contour trolling will allow me to do the job. So let's take off, and I'll demonstrate to you contour trolling, and then after we do that, I also want to go over the procedures for pattern trolling and then trolling the deeper break lines with wire line. Now when I'm trolling the shallows, when I'm doing this contour trolling that we were talking about, I normally run out a relatively short line, so I'm going to count out about 10 layers here. There we go. And the idea now of this contour trolling is pretty simple. We're going to angle the boat in towards our structure until I can feel that lure start to bump the bottom. And once I feel it bump, then I'll just slightly angle towards deeper water until it starts free running. Then once I feel it free running, I'll again angle back in towards the structure. Now there it's bumped the bottom a little bit, so I angle out just a little bit. Now it's key that we don't over control the boat and make sudden turns like this. Of course, most causeways and dams as we're fishing here are pretty darn straight. So it's a pretty straight line past, and you don't have to maneuver the boat too much. But by moving the boat in and out, you're able to cover the different depths. With this lure, I'm covering between around 4 feet. Oh, I thought there's a fish. Around 4 foot of water, and when it bumps, I'll make them up into about 3, and then I'll turn off forward. When it free runs, I know I'm a little deeper than 4, so then I'll just cut her back in. So this is how we contour troll, and the procedure that we use will be the same with the 400 and the 250 spoon plug as well. As we're checking the shallows, contour trolling is the way to go. Because a bass will take a lure in the shallows, sometimes free running, sometimes bumping the bottom, sometimes even on top. As you know, take a topwater lure. So in order to thoroughly cover these shallow sections, we have to check all of the water from the bank down to 10 feet. And that's what the contour trolling lures will allow you to do. And again, because of the size of this structure, it's quite long, probably a couple of miles in length. Certainly trolling is by far the best and the fastest way to cover the structure. So we just bump, move in until it bumps, and looky there. Right on cue, I caught a fish. Yeah, that's a good one. Well, he came right on cue, didn't he? Yeah. I tell you, that cold front went through. Those fish got a little bit dormant, I'm afraid. He's not fighting me like he normally would. Maybe I spoke too soon, huh? There you go. That's what the riprap will do. Okay, now, as I started to say a minute ago, when I'm making these contour trolling passes, of course I'm always making sure that I'm bumping, free running, and maneuvering and controlling the boat in such a way to keep that lure in position, keep it just where it's supposed to be. But at the same time, I have to also realize that my speed control is critical as well. So if I'm making a long trolling pass on a causeway or a dam or a long brake line, any feature, I'm going to make sure that if I go a quarter-mile or so and I don't have a fish, I'm just going to change that motor a little bit and up my speed. Most fishermen probably, is a general statement that you could make is that most fishermen fish far too slow most of the time. So don't be afraid to get that speed cranked up. Sometimes in the summer times it would be very fast. But right now, the speed seems to be, at least on those first couple of fish, I was sort of at a medium trolling speed right in here. But again, if I wasn't catching fish, I'd have to be sure to continue to check my speeds. And at the same time, of course, I've got to keep that lure bumping. Bump, free run. Now, as I'm making this pass, it probably appears in the camera that I'm going pretty straight. And in fact, that is what's occurring, but only because of how the structure is laid out. If I were to be working an irregular shoreline, there'd be quite a bit more boat control to keep the lure right. But in the case of the causeways and the road beds and the dams, normally these are very straight and the control is very limited. Now, it's important that we control the boat very quickly when a change is determined, but we don't want to make that correction too severe, such as this. I don't want to be turning the boat and making big corrections like that, because I'll end up getting the lure out of position. So the whole idea is to, when you feel it start to free run or you feel it bump, make that correction instantly, but don't make it too severe. And folks, that's all there is to contour trolling. Bump, free run, continuing, of course, to check your speeds at all times. Sometimes when you're trolling a riprap, you get a little surprise. We're catching bass, catching a row, 7 or 8, and looky here, look at the size of that crappie. Jim, I'm telling you, that crappie's going to go 3 pounds.
I just want to close with you getting the idea that this contour trolling of the shallows, it not only will catch you a bunch of fish, but it'll help you learn your lake. It will also teach you how to be a better troller when trolling the deeper break lines. It's a real teacher. And a lot of my friends up in Minnesota, they say, you know, all of our lakes they have a weed line. Well, you start on the outside edge of the weed line and you follow that, and it'll teach you your lake, and it'll teach you how to troll. So with all that being said, thank you for being with me today. I want you to like us on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe. Hit that little red button down there. Subscribe to our channel, and we'll talk to you the next time.